I feel very called to become a member of the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Happy New Year! Here on Open Line Friday with Colin, Donovan, EWTN's Vice President of Theology. Whew! What did you think of those national semifinal games yesterday, Colin? They were amazing.
Well, we don't want to give the results away for those who haven't heard the scores yet, but outstanding games.
Yeah, we're actually joking because we're recording this ahead of time. We won't be in the studio on the day you're listening to this, but it's a brand new program. Colin's going to answer some emails, so we won't be taking your phone calls today. And boy, I wish I knew the results of those semifinal games already.
Well,
I could make a ton of money and give it all to the church.
That's true. I wish I knew that Alabama was going to win, but I don't. Well, our listeners who are listening on January 1st will know the answer to that. Who is in the championship game?
Are the Crimson Tide #1 in Saskatoon? Did you grow up as a young lad in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, rooting for the Alabama Crimson Tide?
No, it was probably the Saskatchewan Rough
Riders.
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of football.
And you know, at one time, I'm a native St. Louisan, and Saskatoon tried to steal my Blues once back in the 80s, and I still haven't gotten over it.
I think they have designs. They have the Blades right now.
Right.
And, of course, it's the middle of hockey season, so everything's ramping up there.
So anyway, mailbag show today with Colin. I'm Jack Williams. Elena Rodriguez produces the phone calls. How am I doing? Elena Rodriguez produces the show, and Matt Gubinski would have been your call screener if we were taking phone calls, but we're not, so he isn't. And we'll head straight to the emails, Colin, if that's all right with you.
I guess so, unless you want to list all the other people who aren't doing the show today.
It's long but distinguished. Tanya writes in, I've been trying to go to reconciliation once a month, but I sometimes reach a point when I don't think I've sinned all month. Of course, I must have, so I end up going to and confessing my habitual sins that I probably did and just don't remember. I try to keep in mind that if St. John Paul II went every day, I must have something to confess once a month. Do you have any tips for improving my examination of conscience? I usually use the National Catholic Register Guide online or one given by my parish priest. Are the sins I'm missing sins of omission? Possibly. I have never known how to confess a sin of omission. The closest I got was telling a priest I didn't pray enough, and he made it sound like that wasn't really a sin since I used the word enough. Thanks for your help, and that's Tanya.
Yeah. Well, I think she hits on a great practical questions that a lot of people are dealing with in their spiritual life. We can reach a point in our progress in the spiritual life where we don't have mortal sin and we ask ourselves, well, what should I confess? I think there's a number of ways of having a good practice of a devotional confession, which means a monthly, or it could be longer since it's not an obligatory confession in which there would be mortal sin. But it's a devotional or spiritual confession whose purpose is the perfection of the moral life of the person. One of those that is highly recommended in Ignatian spirit and other spirituality is the particular examination. And that is, we all have a predominant fault, and she mentions her habitual sins or faults, whether there can be moral culpability or inculpability in the particular cases, is to examine those actually every day. And to just, maybe in a book for the day, your calendar, just put the number. Okay, I gossip 3 times. Let's say that's your predominant fault, is you love to get around with the other ladies or the fellas and, talk about stuff in a gossipy way. Maybe it's sports figures, maybe it's fashion, maybe whatever it is, you get distracted by that and it becomes loose talk. And to keep account and try to, every time you do it, to examine yourself in the moment and to try to progress. Then when it comes time for your devotional confession, rather than a laundry list of all of the particular venial sins that you can remember, you're concentrating on a predominant fault that is for you sort of the central issue. And this way you work on one thing and you don't dissipate your energies. So I would recommend a daily examination on some point of, say, particular danger or of particular fault, either way. And then collectively you can go once a month or every 40 days, which is 20 days before and after, and that's the period for gaining an indulgence. You can gain an indulgence for up to 20 days, essentially 3 weeks after confession or 3 weeks before. So if you're going at least every 6 weeks, then you can daily gain indulgences. So I would say that might be the maximum to go, and more frequently, monthly or even weekly. But if you go every week, then keep it simple. Don't try to recite everything you did wrong that week. Now, regarding sins of omission, you can look to, for instance, if it's gossiping, when did somebody in your group of people you talk with regularly say something morally offensive that you didn't at least give a sign of displeasure for that? That would be a sin of admission, to show that I didn't make any remonstration that what this person said about Mary or Susie or Bob was wrong and rash judgment or calumny or whatever. That would be a kind of thing. It's sort of tie it to the particular fault, and I think that would be a very useful examination.
And if I may add one thing, Tanya, for you, there is a very good examination of conscience, the best that I have ever found, and it's located in a book called Time Management for Catholics, written by Dave Durand, and he devotes one of the chapters of the book to an examination of conscience based on the Ten Commandments, and it is the most thorough examination of conscience that I've ever run across, and I'm sure that book is probably available at EWTNRC.com. That's Time Management for Catholics by Dave Durand. Quickly, we'll take one more here, Colin. Maury writes, the word says 6 days should thou work, and the seventh is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. This being his Sabbath, why did the church change it to Sunday?
Well, the church didn't send out a pontifical notice of having to do it. Today we would get a motu proprio on whether, on what day of the week we'd have it. We just see in the New Testament, for instance, look at the number of times that the first day of the week is mentioned. For instance, Paul, in the Acts, we see he goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath in order to speak to Jews about Christ. And then on the first day of the week, they gather for the breaking of the bread and for prayer and the collection for the poor and so on. So there was a very natural transition among Christians to the celebration of the resurrection. There is no point you can point to that says, aha, this is the day it began. We simply see it taking place there, and the church in her memory always has celebrated Sunday as the day of the Lord's resurrection. Now, there's a good logical reason why that came about. It's a new covenant. It's not the covenant of creation that includes the covenant of Noah, for instance, celebrated on the day which the Lord rested, but it's the covenant regarding the new creation, which is the day that creation was entirely and completely and ultimately renewed in that first individual of the new covenant, Jesus Christ. And so that is the reason we celebrate it, although we can't say, here's the day the apostles made that decision. But yet we see that they took the first day of the week as the day to gather and to meet and to pray.
Thanks so much. Off to a flying start on a very special New Year's Day edition of EWTN's Open Line with our Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan. We're not taking your phone calls today. This is a pre-recorded special edition for this New Year's Day. So we won't give out the phone numbers, but we will be answering some of your emails. And if you've sent an email in, keep listening. We may answer yours. Open Line Friday.
I see God as a trusting father, a father who really cares for me, is guiding me in his providence, one who really has me wrapped in his love so that I don't need to worry about anything as I go through my day-to-day life.
Without God, I'm nothing. Take Two with Jerry and Debbie is a fresh look on life through the eyes of faith, love, and mercy.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Weekdays, noon and midnight Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
The pertinent question that is on the mind of modern man is whether belief in God is credible and responsible in light of contemporary science. We at the Magis Center believe that we can answer this question in the affirmative. There are two ways in which science gives credence to theism. First, science can provide observational data taken from within the universe that points to an absolute beginning of time and physical reality, which metaphysically necessitates a transcendent creator. Secondly, science can give evidence of finely tuned characteristics of the laws of physics that are necessary for life to develop in our universe. We call these anthropic coincidences, and such coincidences can only be responsibly and reasonably explained by supernatural intelligence. For these two reasons, science makes belief in God credible. To learn more about this topic, visit our website, magicenter.com. I'm Carlo Broussard, apologist and speaker for the Magis Center with your Magis Minute.
Monday on EWTN Radio's Open Line Show, John Martinoni takes your questions about the Bible and the Catholic Church, 3 p.m. Eastern on EWTN.
Making a difference. EWTN Radio.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
This is a very special mailbag edition of EWTN's Open Line Friday on this New Year's Day with our Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan. Right back to the emails we go. Teresa writes in, please explain why Catholics are to believe, what Catholics are to believe about the third message of Fatima from Our Lady. You can read different statements about whether it has been opened and revealed or whether there's another part which is yet to be revealed. In 1960, the secret was opened, and it was thought that the shot fired at the Pope and the dedication of Russia was completed. Is this so, or is there more to come, as the internet stories say, because of the revelation that they say was not completely given? What is the Church's position on the third secret of Fatima? Colin Donovan, go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the official third secret, or the last part of a single secret, is given to us by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in 2000, when the Pope went to Fatima and beatified the two little children, Francisco and Jacinta, beatified them, and at the end of the secretary, former secretary of the CDF, Bertoni, read the commentary of the explanation. All official documents, all contacts with the monastery and with the sister, her sister Lucia herself, when she was alive, affirm that this was the secret that she communicated to the Holy See in the 1940s, and that the commentary and the explanation of it is consistent with what she understands. So I think we have to take her at her word. We have to take the Holy See at its word. Now, with respect to Russia, I think so much is made of that as if 1917 is a moment locked in time. I've actually noticed a transition in the Fatima message, or in things related to it, over a period of time. I've gotten quite interested in a young blessed named, I can't think of her name, Blessed Alexandra of, she's from the, her name completely eludes me at the moment. But anyway, she was a mystic who, around the time of Fatima, began receiving messages from our Lord. She went through the stigmata. She lived on the Eucharist for a number of years, and she began.
Blessed Andrina Maria da Costa.
That's it. Alexandrina Maria da Costa. That's who it is. Okay, so she began receiving requests from our Lord similar to those given in Fatima. asking for the consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart. And it was at that time that Sister Lucia also asked for the consecration of the world of Pius XII. And it is believed that the coincidence in timing is that when both of those requests had come in separately to the Holy See, the Pope decided to act on them, and he did a consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart. This is in 1942. Now remember, the request back in 1917 was the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart. And what I believe is, had the Pope, had the Church acted on that request, had Fatima been approved and it had acted on that request, then the activity of communism in the 1930s would have been restrained, and it would have had the effect that Our Lady asked for. Through human fault, it did not. And instead of communism now, the language that is given to Alexandrina is Marxism. That's a broader category. Marxism encompasses the particular kind of communism in Russia, the Stalinism, the Leninism, and so on, as well as in China, which came later in the late 40s, and also the sort of democratic Marxism that we see in the West, whether it was in Italy or whether it was in the United States. And we know from historical evidence that the 1930s here in the United States was not only a period of activity of the Communist Party in the United States, but also essentially the point in which the Marxist idea infiltrated academia and other elites in our country, the results of which we're seeing today. And if you look closely at what Our Lady said at Fatima, said that if this is not done, Russia will spread her errors. And so the consecration of Russia was not done in time to prevent the spread of those errors. And then Our Lady asked through Lucia, and our Lord through Alexandrina, she asked for the consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart in order to contain Marxism, this broader category of atheistic, militant atheism. And so I think that's what we see happening, and we are living, as it were, downstream from what the Church did not accomplish in time to prevent this. And as Our Lady said, that this would be done late. It was done late. It had effect in terms of Russia and the restraint of the Soviet Union, but we are now living in the West the results of not only the human acceptance of Marxist socialism in Russia and in China, but also even among many of the elites of our own country. And we, in particular in the United States, are experiencing that to a great degree in our day. But the bottom line is we have the promise that in the end the Immaculate Heart will triumph. And so the message of Fatima, which Pope Benedict said, is still applicable to our time, that living of, that praying of the Rosary, that living of the gospel ideal of prayer and penitence for sinners and reparation and all of those, that is still very active today. We may have missed the boat on the terms of preventing Russia from spreading her errors, but I think we have gained through the consecration of 1984 at least an interlude, and we are again, it seems, experiencing the upgrowth of this Marxist ideology, which is atheistic, which is socialistic, and which is against God, against Christ, and the Church.
Tanai in Pennsylvania writes, my husband and I have been practicing natural family planning to abstain because of my anxiety disorder. We are at an impasse. He wants more children, and I don't because of fear. Fear of being pregnant and having anxiety attacks heightened. We don't agree on this, and it's something he really wants. So who wins in this case? I really need some help in this area.
Well, I don't think.
Let's not make it a contest. I think would probably be the first piece of advice.
That's where I was going. Let's not turn this into a winning-lose situation. Yeah. The standard which Pope Paul VI gave in Humanae Vitae is that there can be many reasons why a couple decides to postpone pregnancy even for the whole of married life, in other words, reproductive years, including what you could argue in some point of view is subjective reasons, such as the mental health and strength and moral stamina of one or the other of the spouses. So these are things to take to prayer together, to take to, if there's a medical component, to the doctor, whether a doctor of your physical health or of your mental health, together. And then ultimately, of course, to take to God and with the guidance of a good spiritual director who's knowledgeable in these areas, to come to a decision. But in point of fact, it really is up to you together to decide, since obviously the conjugal act is one that cannot be forced on either party. It's an obligation of either party, but it's an obligation that charity should take charge of and not simply need. And so I think there are reasons why both of you need to look into this from both dimensions, your mental health dimension and he from the point of view of his charity and his love for you, and what that would mean in terms of waiting for the opportune moment.
And I think, Colin, that oftentimes, you're not a pastor, neither am I, but I think oftentimes these are situations where a lot of married couples, I think, each spouse sort of carries these concerns apart from the other, and that's really what heightens the animosity between them regarding these issues.
It's that old bugaboo which along with money keeps showing up on causes of marital disharmony. And that's certainly true, and that's communication. Getting that communication going and understanding that, yes, you need to, in a certain sense, you need to defer to him with regard to what used to be called the right to the body for the acts which are, connatural with that. But on the other hand, he needs to defer out of charity to you if you just simply could not handle in any respect, emotionally or physically, a pregnancy at this time. So I think there's room to give there, and to do so in prayer and with consultation with those who can help you.
And one of the first things that you mentioned, oftentimes even when these things are discussed between the couple, how often are they prayed about together by the couple?
I think that's also got to be key.
We have an email here from Kenneth in Perth, Australia, and he says, "Hi there, EWTN family. I'm not sure who can help me with this question. It concerns the determination of the sex of a person. I was always under the impression that the XX and XY chromosome would determine one's sex, but this website that he cites later seems to suggest that there are other factors at play. Can you please help clarify this so that we can understand what is and what is not true in this period of history, where there are so many propositions that lead people into confusion? Even as we speak, there are loud voices in Australia, including those in government, who are pushing for same-sex quote-unquote marriages, and misinformation may be used to question the relevance of one's sex or gender in determining the right decision. Please help us make sense of this," and then he quotes the particular website that he's talking about.
Yeah, we may have to take this up both before and after the break, but I'll at least start into it. First of all, there's a number of factors. It all depends on what people consider natural. A lot of people say natural is whatever we find in nature. And if that's the case, then rape and pillage and all of the evil things that human beings do are natural. That can't be the standard. So what you have to do is say, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of human sexuality, or canine sexuality, or feline sexuality, or whatever animal sexuality? It has a purpose. It's reproduction. So that's the starting point. Those organs would not be there if the species did not, as it were, quote, in quotes, desire to replicate and perpetuate itself. And they are there for that purpose. And so when the sexual organs appear on the person, they are for the purpose of that natural purpose. And this is, at least from the point of view of nature and biology, one of the reasons the church says that sexuality has reproduction or the pro-life dimension as the essential dimension of its very nature.
And we'll finish that thought in just a moment on a special mailbag edition of EWTN's Open Line Friday.
This is Patrick Coffin. Join me for Catholic Answers Live. It's 2 hours dedicated to Catholic apologetics and evangelization. Designed for Catholics and non-Catholics alike, it's your opportunity to hear from and talk with some of the leading apologists and theologians in the church today. You've got questions? We've got Catholic answers. Catholic Answers Live, weekdays 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
60 Seconds with Father Mitch Pacwa.
The focus of the Eucharist needs to be Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity present on that altar and being given to the people to receive into their minds, their hearts, their very bodies. And when Jesus is the center, he will form us into a proper community that you don't have to do because you feel good about each other. Because one of the great things about Christ is that he can form a community when you don't feel good about each other. Matter of fact, when you feel kind of rotten about the other people, he can still form into community. And if you don't believe me, read what the apostles were like when he's trying to form them into a community. This means that the parish is a community properly suited for the celebrating of the Eucharist.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
This is Al Kresta, host of Kresta in the Afternoon, and Kresta in the Afternoon looks at all of life through the lens of Scripture and the teaching of the Catholic Church. Church teaching is the light by which we view the world, and so we'll explore everything, from abortion to Hollywood, and from the First Amendment to the United Nations, and everything in between. Following St. Paul, we're seeking transformation through the renewing of our minds. So that's Kresta in the Afternoon with me, Al Kresta, weekdays 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
And if you send an email to openline@ewtn.com, we may be answering your email today. This is a very special pre-recorded mailbag edition of EWTN's Open Line Friday with our Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donovan. And Colin, we're discussing a question sent in by Kenneth in Australia, and he's really asking you to compare and contrast the biological reality of sex determination versus a lot of the cultural ideas that are being thrown out about that in our society today.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you have a lot of ideological expressions of and use of the science in which you have it proclaimed that, well, homosexuality or bisexuality or anything that you want to point to is found in nature, therefore it's natural. And that's simply not true. It doesn't even make common sense. Because the nature of something, especially if you are an evolutionist, has to be what is benefiting the species. What is the nature and the purpose of those particular organs in the individual? We know what the organs of digestion are for. We know how they work, and we know when they go wrong, that they are wrong and they need to be corrected. This has simply been lost in our culture because everybody is the presumption that their sexuality is a pure given, an individualistic given, and that because it phenomenologically can be found on a spectrum, from what you might call the hyper male to the hyper female and all between, including intersex individuals in the middle, and of course homosexuals, bisexuals, and different grades and degrees of all of that along the way, that somehow this is simply natural because it exists in the world. That makes no sense whatsoever. So the ethical behavior, moral behavior, institutions of society, and especially science should reflect the nature and purpose of natural things, and what best serves their interest. So you can take any one of these things and you can line them up and ask the question, is this particular organ, function, bodily system, does it serve a natural purpose in these other things? In heterosexuality, we know that the complementarity of the man and woman is bodily or somatically, and we also know that it's psychologically, that women have gifts that men don't have and men have gifts that women don't have, and that together they make a pretty, if they can get beyond these differences and so on, and sort of the give and take of marriages we were talking about before the break, then you come up with a pretty good idea of what God intended the human being to be, and to be a reflection of himself. But if they don't, then you get a pretty good idea of what's wrong with the society and what's wrong with individuals, morally and otherwise. Now, the issue of the gender is certainly a complicated one. Yes, on a very basic level, an individual with two X chromosomes is a female, and an individual with a Y chromosome is a male, because the Y chromosome will drive the embryonic development of the new human being towards the development of male organs of reproduction, so that that child will have a male system, and others will have, those who have 2X have a female system. Now, what goes wrong in there? What goes wrong in there includes such things as what goes genetically wrong, deletions and mutations, and even the loss of entire chromosomes on the part of future boys, such that their body no longer expresses their masculine sex, which would have otherwise been present. Those are failures in nature, not achieving its ends and purposes, which it was evidently designed for because of the presence of the Y chromosome. And so in whatever measure that presence is there. So we have to deal with these mistakes. And you can have mistakes in the womb, so that a woman who maybe is, I don't know how this would be done, but there can be disease reasons why their body is producing more of the androgens, the male hormones, and as a result there is masculinization of a female in the womb, and you end up with an ambiguously sexed child. Those again are mistakes. They're not the design of nature. When you get down to the bottom, or you have other influences which are genetically related, it's the new field of epigenetics, in which environmental changes can cause one or two generations to be modified in the way the sexuality masks itself based on changes, and then it may revert back to the natural thing. All of those are exceptions to what the purposes of nature does. And we can know those purposes simply by the fact, what do those organs do? They're not organs of digestion. They're not organs of motility to allow us to walk around, or tactility to allow us to do things, or of speech or hearing. They're organs of reproduction. And so when they mate, generally you don't get disease functions. You get the organs reacting to each other as they serving the purpose for which they were created. Whereas you get other kinds of couplings, there is typically disease related to it, even severe disease related to it. The musculature and such does not respond and produces any kind of syndromes and things that are the result of muscles and parts of the body being essentially abused in the acts of these other relationships. And so again, you get back to, if you're saying you're going to be a natural man or a natural human being, you've got to look, what does nature intend for these? And you don't exist on a life of junk food or bad things put into your mouth and through your digestive tract. We know all the problems those things cause. Well, it's no different for the sexual organs. It's clearly not natural behavior unless you take, simply as I said, and which is the tendency today, the existence in society of certain phenomenological cases, whether it's homosexual of some degree or bisexual of some degree or some other, and you simply say that's normal and natural, and now we need to institutionalize places for them in society and accept that as legitimate sexual relationships. This is something human beings have not done up to now in history. They've recognized that it's not natural up to now in history, and therefore it has to be treated as such. That doesn't mean persecution. That doesn't mean doing anything against them, because after all, they may or may not be at fault for their condition. So the intersex child who is born with ambiguous genitalia and has a condition like that, this is not his fault. This is no moral fault on his part. Has to be treated humanely and all of that. But that doesn't mean that we need to have a third kind of bathroom for them. Are we going to end up having, for the hundreds or thousands of variations of sexuality, are we going to end up having facilities and relationships geared for every one of them? This is where we're going. This is where some groups have lists of 60s and 70 genders that they say are all, quote, natural. Well, the church simply says that's not legitimate. And in calling that disordered, it's not saying moral fault. Moral fault comes about by a personal choice to do something forbidden by God or forbidden by the natural law. The churches simply say this is not the proper ordering of sexuality. That's all it means. Unfortunately, our societies have bought into this phenomenological view that the existence of these things amounts to their naturalness, despite all of the medical and psychiatric evidence of the difficulties that those create when acted upon as behaviors, and they're acting on them as they did recently in Australia, and I think which prompted this, and passing some laws with regard to other genders. So we're going down a path which is guaranteed to, I think within 5 years, it will be difficult to find a place where, at least in law, sexuality is admitted to be male and female, with other exceptions being related to those two sexualities, but simply a personal choice based on some flavor of sexuality that is my own personal, strand, flavor, type, whatever, and then everybody else has to correspond to that because that's me. Well, no, me is you made in the image of God, loved by Jesus Christ enough to die on the cross and be saved from the very kinds of behaviors you would like to do in the name of me.
Jim O'Rourke writes in, I am legally married but not in the church. My wife is Protestant, albeit not practicing. She is also divorced, but first marriage was abusive and was granted a divorce. We were not dating. We worked together, but after her divorce, we dated and married. My 2 children were born after our marriage. She had no children prior to that point. I thought I would be able to attend her church when we married, essentially a Protestant church, United Church of Christ, but we moved, and when in South Carolina, we began attending an Episcopal church. However, in both cases, their understanding of sacrament and how they educated children in the means of Christ, it tore at me. Ultimately, I told my wife I wanted to raise them in the Catholic Church. I consider myself Catholic, but was away from the church for many years. I received all the sacraments other than matrimony, and obviously anointing of the sick, etc. I have returned in the past 5 years and been an active member in both my parishes in South Carolina and now Indiana. I have my children attending faith formation, religious education, and my son received Holy Eucharist in the church. My daughter will next year. I've confessed to my South Carolina Monsignor and the assigned parish priest, amazing, a parish with 2 priests these days, and I have confessed to my current pastor. I never asked if I should or should not receive communion, but your call today, was obviously listening to a previous program, tells me I should not. Can I have your opinion on my situation?
Yeah, it's obviously a very complicated one. You're legally married but not in the church. I think that really answers most of it. As a Catholic, you had the obligation to the Catholic form. This is something that would have to be resolved through one of the processes that the church already has, the shorter documentary process or the regular tribunal process, or among the processes that, of course, we've been talking about of late that Pope Francis had wanted to institute to sort of streamline cases which are pretty much clear. I think this is something to go to a marriage tribunal with, and they will tell you what you need exactly, and to refrain from receiving communion until you have some resolution of that status. Because if the woman that you're married with is not recognized by the church as your wife, and yet, unless you're living in brother and sister, you should not be approaching the sacrament of the Eucharist, and in fact, you would not even be able to receive the sacrament of penance, receive absolution, unless the moral element of that had been corrected. The situation of sin, as it were, had been corrected. This is the whole difficulty surrounding the synod, how to deal with cases. And one way you cannot deal with them is simply say that, well, the externalisms, say the tribunal review and so far, are just legalisms. No, this represents the church accepting in the external order your status as you think it to be in the internal order, and confirming for you that that's the case, rather than having you confirm it for yourself. We're always usually pretty gentle on ourselves and ready to find any excuse, why our situation is okay. So you need that external judgment. It can't be simply the internal form or the confessional situation. It has to be a resolution in the external order. It sounds like you may very well have the makings of such a resolution, but you have to go through that procedure, whether it's one of the shorter procedures the Pope has talked about, or one of the traditional procedures that are already in place in the church.
You're listening to a very special mailbag edition of EWTN's Open Line Friday on this New Year's Day, so we won't be taking your phone calls. Colin will be answering emails for the remainder of the hour. Open Line Friday rolls on with EWTN's Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan.
The gift that God presents to humanity that we celebrate every Christmas is the gift of Himself. We celebrate Christmas year after year by giving stuff to each other. But my prayer for you and for myself this Christmas is that we don't get so caught up in the busyness of the holiday that we forget to slow down and give ourselves. Pause from cooking that Christmas meal and tell your loved ones how much they mean to you. Put aside your work and spend an hour playing that board game with your son. No doubt he'll be happy to unwrap that gift under the tree, but your undivided attention will be the far greater gift. And take time to give yourself to God. Try reading about the birth of Jesus from Luke chapter 2 with your loved ones before you rip into those presents together. Come, let us adore Him, but let's follow His example too. Don't just share presents and food this Christmas. Share the gift of yourself. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com.
Podcasts of Open Line are available within 24 hours of live broadcast. Go to EWTN.com and click on Multimedia. A Moment with Mother.
You're not supposed to put a shortwave network on a mountain. Matt took me up. He said, we got some land and we could buy about 200 acres, but it's on the wrong place. So we go up there. I get out of the car. I saw St. Michael just standing there. And I said, we'll buy it. He said, Mother, it's the wrong place. I said, we'll buy it. But you don't put shortwave networks on the mountain. I said, do you see St. Michael there? He said, no, we'll buy it. He said, okay. The first day we were on the air, we got a letter from Japan 2 weeks later saying, I got your signal. We weren't even aiming in that direction. And he said, I like your network for Buddhist prayer. I said, Buddhist prayer? It was the rosary here. I said, let him say the rosary, Lord, he won't know.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
This is a very special mailbag edition here on EWTN's Open Line Friday on this New Year's Day, so we won't be taking your phone calls. Colin, we had an email from Jim who was discussing a potential irregular marriage situation that he was in. And I think it'd be a good idea maybe to kind of talk about what an annulment is and what an annulment isn't. It's not really something to be gotten. It's really just an investigation and a declaration of the truth of the situation.
Yeah, that's right. And I think beginning here, we're still essentially at the beginning of the year of mercy to realize, people also to realize too, that everything the church is doing is beckoning to people to get these situations resolved. There's no point in revising the norms and the canonical if the purpose is not to get people back into the practice of the faith and the sacraments. So this is a good year to do it in. So if you're in one of those situations, maybe pray the Divine Mercy every day, or pray a novena of the Divine Mercy, or say the Year of Mercy prayer every day, something that begging God for the graces, that maybe the moral strength, the inner strength that you and the person you're living with need in order to get these resolved. But basically, and that gentleman had a particularly complicated situation, and sometimes they're even more complicated than that. It generally comes down to two things. There can be factual reasons why a marriage was not a marriage. It sounded like he may have had that one. He married outside the church. The factual reason there is that he didn't get a dispensation from the bishop to marry in a circumstance outside of his home parish setting, or the home parish if you're marrying a Catholic girl, her parish. The church obliges Catholics to be married before an ecclesiastical witness, and a particular one, their pastor of one of the two parties if both are Catholic, or of the Catholic party if one is. And the purpose is to make sure that people are entering marriage with the full knowledge of its ends and its purposes. And its meaning, and with the best possible moral disposition, including a good confession, so that when they receive the sacrament, they also receive sanctifying grace, increase of sanctifying grace, and that they enter upon it in a spiritually good way. So that's why the church has this rule. And if you don't abide by this rule and you decide, we want to get married next week and they want us to wait 6 months, let's just go down to the justice of the peace, you're not married before God or the church. God said, whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. The church is binding on earth. It's bound in heaven. You're not married. You need to get that resolved. That's a factual issue. You did or did not have a dispensation. And a lot of marriages that are especially Catholics marrying in other circumstances are quickly resolved by the tribunal on the basis of the facts, demonstrating, I didn't get a dispensation. Lack of the Catholic form, you're now free to marry in the church. Other things are more complicated. The marriage is valid. You were a non-Catholic at the time, and you married a non-Catholic. But then the question is, and then the spouse ran around on you or never wanted children. So you bring those facts to the tribunal, and the tribunal looks at it, and it decides, look, this party to the marriage did not have the sufficient intention to enter the marriage, or maybe didn't have the capability psychologically to enter upon this lifelong institution. Now, on the basis of that, the tribunal says that we're morally certain that this marriage was invalid from the beginning, that it never existed. And now the two parties are free to marry, obviously free to marry with the correct intention and with the sufficient capacity and all the other considerations. So a marriage tribunal is not a divorce court. It's not deciding a fitting distribution of the property, the children, or, here's half your marriage bond over here, here's half. No. Is there a marriage bond that is to be severed, needs to be severed for this couple to go their separate ways? And if there is, we have no power. But if there was no marriage bond to begin with because of a defect in one or the other or both, then the church can say with a good conscience, we're morally certain you were not married. You are free to marry in the church. And we're morally certain you're free to marry. That's all you need. There are no absolutes on earth.
Sam in Spokane writes, I know that in Catholic teaching, the essence of going to heaven is described as being able to share in the beatific vision. I'm pondering just what that means, and maybe there's no definite answer. Will persons in heaven, either after the particular or general judgment, still have an individual existence as separate persons, or is it possible that at some point in infinity we become merged into the Spirit of God? I also know that Catholic teaching indicates that our bodies will be restored to us at the end of time. I'm not sure how that works when the end of the universe comes about. I'd appreciate your insight into this question.
Well, on the first part, we need only look at the great creed of St. Athanasius, who, describing the way in which Christ is God and man, says specifically that in Christ there is no admixture of these natures, there's no simply intermingling. And so therefore we have to say that with regards to ourselves. We're not intermingling with God. We will be who we are, an individual, in perfect moral union with God, the bond, charity, bond of community. As St. Paul said, faith and hope, they'll go away. We'll see. We have nothing more to hope for. We have God, but charity will last forever because that is what will bind us to God. So that is the one thing that survives, and that is the basis of our unity with God. Now we receive the beatific vision, and we will see him as he is, and a great deal of speculation down through time as to just exactly. It'll be an overwhelming joy. It'll be a sufficient joy. We'll need no other joys because it will fill all of us, whether we're the Blessed Mother with her great sanctity or whether we're the last person to slip in over the threshold. We will be full. We will be perfectly happy. Now, with regard to the resurrection of the body, there is no statement by the Church, obviously, that we're getting every molecule back we'll ever have. We would be extremely large.
I have some I don't want back.
Well, the molecules are always changing. But there is a unity of matter and soul there, and so you will be who you are today, and probably with some of your particular matter, but that's not a point of theological certainty, much less of necessity. But we will be composed of who we are in every respect with all our particular characteristics, and our bodies will be the adequate sacrament of our soul and of our personality as well.
Thanks, Colin, so much for your time. Back at it Monday with John Martinoni on Open Line Monday. Until we get together then, God bless.